Okay, we're going to go ahead and start. If anyone has a question while we are going through the information, please, you can type it in the chat and I will be sure to answer. All right, effective case conferences. I know some of the information today is going to seem like so simple and something that you think, well, everyone should automatically do that. But sometimes the simplest things are the things that we forget. And so today, hopefully I will give you some ideas to help make the process smoother. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of divide it up into 3 sections: before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting. And again, if you have questions, please interrupt or write it in the chat so I can be sure to answer all your questions. What are the most common issues that we see? Communication, preparation, clarity, respect, and transparency. These are the things that parents, when we facilitate case conferences, these are the things that parents often say is the reason that they feel the school is not listening to them, and vice versa. Sometimes the school is like, parents just aren't hearing what we have to say. We're trying to communicate the information, but something just isn't working. So what do we do? What do we do before the conference? As you all know, first of all, you have to have plenty of notice. Parents have to have time to be able to come up with a agreed upon time and place. Now, no one expects schools to start a case conference at 7 o'clock at night, but trying to find that date and time that works for everybody is really important. Even if it's a lunch hour. I facilitated a case conference not long ago where we did it over 2 days during the parents' lunch hour. She was a Zoom call and it worked. Try to accommodate the parent as best as you can. You know, you need to put it in writing. Make sure you have all the right players there. But it's really, really important to try to get the parent to be present or involved. Like I said, even if they can't be at the meeting, if they can participate through Zoom, if they can participate just over the phone, that is a preferable way. Now, I know that there are times where a parent can't or won't participate, but it really does help if you get them to do that. Also, be clear in your notice. I know you check the box if it's a reeval, if it's manifestation, but those things aren't necessarily is something parents know about. So be sure that parents understand what they are coming to. Now, if you write manifestation and check that box, even though, yes, I'm sure a parent knows their child has been out of school for 10 plus days. However, that doesn't mean they understand what a manifestation is. So it's always helpful if you be sure that they know what they're coming to. So make sure that everybody that needs to be there is there. So that means you have to have a public agency rep, a general education teacher, special education teacher, the TOR, the parent, and if the student is of transition age, the student. Now, the student, if a parent does not want the student there, even if they are transition age, the child does not have to attend. When they are 18, since they are then the responsible party, they do have to attend. Make sure everybody that comes knows why they are coming, who they are coming for, and what they need to bring. Never, never. I know this sounds like, are you serious? Would anybody do this? You don't want anyone to say, who are we here for? Why are we here? I actually had someone call the student by the wrong name when they started giving information. So be sure that everybody that comes, service providers, everybody knows exactly who they're coming for, who they're going to talk about, and what information that they need to bring. Now, I know that oftentimes the general ed is excused, but the general ed is just as important as a special ed. They're the ones that can give a picture of the general ed curriculum, how a student performs in general ed. So they're very important. Now, I understand that any case conference anybody has, it means that they are away from instructional time. So if you want to have them excused after they talk, after a particular time, so they stay for most of it, but don't just give them an overall excusal. The other thing I would say about the gen ed is don't always go to the math, language arts, social studies, or science. Think about those other classes, the art, the music, the PE. If a student is really good in one of those things, especially a student with emotional disabilities or students that struggle in math or language arts, find a teacher that can come, that can talk and give some positive feedback. That's always helpful for both parents and for the kids. Obviously, other people can be there because parents can bring whoever they want. They can show up with advocates and they do not have to tell you. You have to tell them who you are inviting, but they can come with extra people. They might bring grandma. They might bring other service providers, interpreters. Schools are responsible if a parent needs an interpreter or a captioner. Parents, the school is responsible for that. That doesn't mean that the parents can't bring an added one. However, the one person on this list that you can stop a case conference for and say, hold up, we need to get a lawyer also. So if a parent shows up with a lawyer and you did not know they were bringing a lawyer, you can stop, or the public agency rep can stop and say, I'm going to make a call to the director. And usually the director will say, okay, we're going to have to reschedule so that we also can have a lawyer at the table. Then you will have to reschedule it. Now, if you're on a timeline, say you're almost at your 50 days and you were going to talk about an evaluation, because you have met, you haven't missed your timeline because you have met, and you can just document that you met, but that you have to reconvene at a later date so that you can have a lawyer present. And just make sure you document everything in the IEP. Your meeting space. Make sure that you have enough chairs at the table. Now, if you have, I know that there are places where the meeting rooms are really small. I understand that. But just make sure that the parent is at the table. If you have to have 2 rows, then if grandma comes, then let grandma sit a little back and let mom sit at the table and dad sit at the table. You don't want to have all school people moved up to the table and mom and dad sitting in the back behind. So you need to have enough chairs at the table. You need to have chairs that are adult size. I am too old to sit in kindergarten chairs for a case conference. So be sure that you have chairs that are the correct size. Make sure you have a space if someone's in a wheelchair, or if a student is in a wheelchair and needs to be pulled up to the table. So just make sure that you have chairs that fit adults. I know you can't always control the temperature or the light, but try to make it as comfortable as possible. Think about it beforehand. I mean, again, you don't always know. You don't always know who's going to come, but try, if you have an idea from past case conferences or from other situations, kind of add some chairs. Or at least know where you can get chairs if you need them. You have to think about, are you going to project? Are you going to not project? So if you're going to project, make sure that everyone can see the screen so that it's clear. If you're going to have a virtual meeting, sometimes you have to choose between, are you going to project or are you going to be able to see the people? Because sometimes there's enough people where you can't really do both well. So you just have to decide how you're going to do that. Yeah. Is there any questions? I'm going to keep going. And if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I also will stop at the end of each section to ask if you have any questions. Okay, here's some different room arrangements. Now, I've never been in a school where they had a round table. I mean, obviously, a round table is the best if you want to keep eye contact or see everybody. But most of the spaces that I have been in have been the other two, the octagonal, the rectangle, and the U-shaped. The U-shape is often the best if you're going to obviously have a screen. Everybody can see the screen. It keeps people separated. It encourages people to look at each other most of the time. If you're at a big long table and you're projecting, obviously somebody will have their back to the screen, so that's more difficult. Depending on how big your table is, you don't want to be screaming down to the other end of it. So when you're thinking about how it looks, just be thinking about how many people you have and who's got to sit where. And I know that every room is different. If you're doing it in your classroom, again, think about if you're going to project wherever your projection is. And even if you have desks instead of tables, but you have, again, adult-sized chairs, just make them in a formation so that people can see each other. You don't want people sitting in rows. You want people around so you can see and make eye contact. All right, so how do you prepare? When you're writing all your information out, I know you write great information, but you do not have to read that verbatim. You can summarize your information. You definitely need to summarize outside reports, especially if you have doctor reports or outside psychologist reports. Have your psych look it over and be able to speak to it and summarize it in a way that everybody can understand. Because we all know that sometimes when you get like doctor or psych reports, there's lots of information and numbers and percentages and age equivalents and words that need to be explained in layman's terms. So be sure that your psych has the information ahead of time or their own information and is able to summarize it. Any data that you need, if you need progress monitoring, if you need behavior information, have that all with you. Whatever you think you're going to need, have it with you. Collect it. If you need information from a math teacher, but the PE teacher is the one that's the general like coming, make sure you get the information from the math teacher or the language arts teacher. Draft your IEP. You can have a draft IEP that you can change as you go. If you are the teacher of record and you are the one that is putting the information in, excuse me, know that if it's going to be a difficult case conference, you might want to have somebody else doing part of that, putting information in, or at least taking notes. Because it's really hard to be the one typing the information as well as talking about the information. So you don't want to spend all your time putting in the information and not being able to speak to it. Make sure that if you are using a draft, that you go in and you remove the information from last year and put your new information in for your present levels, because you don't need all the old information. I would suggest that you put a date, your name, and the information, and I would tell your service providers to do the same thing so that you know what's old and what's new. The information is saved in your previous IEP that was accepted. So it's there. But if people don't, if we don't delete the old information, then by the time a student is in high school, they have a 95-page IEP, and it's hard to tell where the new information is. So make sure you remove any old information that is not relevant anymore and just have new information, right? Last year's IEP is not a draft for this year. You can leave some of the things in. If you don't know about the students, obviously an IEP is about students. So what do students know? Does a student know what their disability is? Does a student know anything about their goals? These are things that you have to think about because you're going to need, I mean, it's what we need to work with kids, not do stuff to kids as far as, okay, you've got to work on these vocabulary words. Well, why? If a student knows why they are doing something, it is much easier to get buy-in, and you'll probably see better results if they understand why they are doing something. Especially as they get older, when they have to go into their own transition planning, case conferences, and they need to advocate for themselves. We have to teach them how to do that. It's really hard to go into a room with adults and advocate for yourself. So I would say kind of work on this as from the beginning. Now, I know I've had parents say they don't want their student to know that they have a disability. Most kids know. So you would have to talk to parents on that. But again, talk with parents about working on dependence rather than independence the whole time. If a student knows their accommodations and they learn how to ask for their accommodations, it's much easier to learn as an elementary student than when you get to be in middle school or high school. Students don't always ask appropriately to adults, so they have to learn how to do that. Okay, so that's everything that you can do before the meeting. So is there any questions that you have about how to prepare for the meeting? If you have students, like even the smallest students, if you ask them what their strengths are, if you have had them help you progress monitor, like maybe you're working on decoding and they've learned a lot more words and they have kept track of their own progress monitoring, bring that information to the meeting. They don't have to come and actually attend the meeting to give the information, but you can bring their information to the table. Okay? No questions? All right. So now we're going to move on to during the meeting. We already talked about what the setup of the room looks like. But how do you seat people at that table? We talked about how it helps to be able to see if you're projecting. You do not want the parents to sit at the head of the table. Why? Because that means when you look down the table, everybody's looking at you, and that's a little bit uncomfortable. It's also uncomfortable if the school personnel are seated at the tables already, and then the parents come in, and what happens? All eyes turn to the parents, and the parents sit at the head of the table. That's very uncomfortable. So that you want them to be able to sit on the sides. Also, it helps if you know what the status of the parents are. If you have two parents that maybe don't get along, maybe are divorced, maybe are bringing significant others with them, but they are both coming to participate in their child's case conference, that is a plus. But you don't necessarily want to sit them next to each other. So if you know this information ahead of time, allow for that to happen. If you're not sure, but you know the parents are not together, kind of allow space on both sides of the table so they can determine whether they want to sit together or sit apart. As you get to know kids and as you hear from teachers that have them previously, you all will learn who can sit next to each other and who can't. But just know to accommodate that, because it is awesome that they are both there to support their child. So just be aware of that. The other thing to be aware of is if there is whoever comes with the parent, whether that be an advocate, a lawyer, grandma, they need to sit together. You don't want to sit them all separately so that the parent has the ability to sit next to the people that came to support them. Okay, so water, coffee, snack. I know that some schools, you don't always have the ability to have food, have water to offer, have coffee to offer. If you do, that's great. A snack can be as easy as a bowl of candy in the center of the table. But the issue here is that you don't want all of your school people to come with their big slurps and their Starbucks venti coffees, and a parent has nothing. So if you can't offer the parent something, then the rest of you really can't have anything. If the parent comes with something, that's fine. Everybody can have, but you don't want to have that inequality of having a parent sitting there thirsty watching everybody else drink. Also think about sometimes over that lunch time period, I have had case conferences that have lasted from in the morning till in the afternoon. So you have to think about lunch. Are you going to break for lunch? Are you going to just have something brought in? Are you going to power through and not eat? These are things you have to think about. If you're having a meeting in the morning and it gets to be that lunch hour, you can stop then and say, hey, what do you want to do? Do you want to continue? We have probably this much more time to go, or do you want to stop and come back to the table? Those are things you have to think about as you're going through the case conference. Extra pens, notepads, things like that. This is because if you've ever been in a case conference where there's a question or mom wants to ask somebody on the outside, she's digging through her purse trying to find a piece of paper and a pencil. When I was running case conferences, I always just had scratch paper in the center of the table, and I had some pencils and pens, and anybody could use it. So that parents knew that it was available to them to use also. So that, because when you're trying to find something, you're not listening to the conversation. So this just keeps everybody engaged and kind of keeps everybody on the same page. So this is really important. The first point here about have each person introduce themselves and state their role. And the reason this is important is because of, as I pointed out earlier, the lawyer that might be at the meeting. If you don't ask what people are there for or what their role is, then a lawyer may not say they're there as a lawyer. If you ask them to state their role, they're going to tell you their role, which will give you a heads up then of how to proceed. But have everybody introduce themselves and why they are there. When it comes to a mother and she says, I'm mom, I would suggest that you stop and say, no, your name. We're going to call you by your name. So it can't be, I'm Jennifer's mom. No, you have to be Sarah Smith. And also, this keeps so everybody knows who everybody is and why they are there. The level of formality is important because if I am referred of as Dr. Ringwald and the school personnel are Mr. or Mrs. or Doctor, and mom is Julie, that's a different level of formality. And that puts the school personnel above the parent, and it should be everybody's on the same level in a case conference. So it doesn't matter which you choose. If you're more comfortable having the school personnel being called by their first name, then everybody can be by their first name. Otherwise, if it is a title, then the mother needs to be Ms., Mrs., Doctor, whatever she is also. Same with dad, who's ever there, whatever adult is there needs to be treated the same way so that it keeps the level of formality the same. Now, as far as roles that you might need, again, if you have a difficult case conference and you need to have a note taker, usually timekeepers aren't quite as important. If you are the one that running it and you need to ask, hey, does anybody have a time limit? You need to keep track of the time. But the note taker can be immensely important because it is often hard to take notes when there is a lot of discussion and lead the discussion. So sometimes I have asked a social worker or another school personnel to come in and be my note taker and to help me with that information. So because it's just really hard. So I would say have the note taker. And when you go through introducing the people, you can introduce that person as the note taker. And so as you go through, that person can be really, really important. And again, if it's going to be a difficult conference or not difficult necessarily, but just a lot of discussion, I would highly recommend that you get a note taker. Ground rules. You have to go over the ground rules at the beginning. You can't go back. You can't forget about the ground rules and then partway through think, okay, we need to start being respectful. It's hard to go back because you've already set the precedent that you don't have to be respectful. So you need to set the ground rules. I have these when we facilitate. I have a like poster size with these on, and I post them up on the wall. When I was doing my own, I had just a piece of paper laminated that I had on the table so that people all could see it, and I would go through it, and then you have to have agreement on it. And the agreement can be however you're comfortable having it agreed upon. If that's going around the room, everybody, make sure everybody looks at you, eye contact, and shake their head yes, thumbs up, a verbal agreement. But you need to have everybody agree. Because again, then during the conference, if something is not being done, you can go back and say, hey, everybody, we agreed on these. Don't forget, we agreed on these. So here on the screen, you will see that I've just listed some of the things that we have on ours about listening respectfully, sharing information, etc. The hardest one, I think, is that eliminate sidebar conversations. This is where you need to kind of explain. The rest of them are self-explanatory. I'll explain the agenda in a minute. And again, just asking about time limits so that you know when you need to interject and say, hey, we're getting close to the time. Do we want to continue or do we want to set another time? Side conversations can be very disruptive. If you have two school personnel talking about something quietly, or a parent and an advocate talking quietly, A, they're not listening to the conversation, and B, the other party thinks they're being sneaky or talking about them or being rude because obviously they can't say it out loud, where it might not be the case. It might be a legitimate question that they have about something, or, hey, we need more information. If the school personnel are saying, hey, go get so-and-so or go get some information. So what I tell people is it's okay to have those conversations, but we're going to stop. So if you want to have a sidebar conversation, if a parent wants to stop and talk to their advocate about something, that is perfectly okay. So just say, excuse me, I'd like to have a conversation. And either the school personnel can get up and leave and come back in 5 minutes, the parent and the advocate, or the parent and the parent, or whoever it is, can walk and talk and be gone for 5 minutes and come back to the table, just as long as it's not done at the table. But it is okay to stop and have them. There has to be some rules guiding it. Now, I would say that if you are recording, if the meeting is being recorded, it should have already been determined at the beginning that it was going to be recorded. But I would say, school personnel, beware that when a parent and an advocate or a parent and a lawyer leaves the room, that either you are ensured that the recordings are turned off, or better yet, just talk about anything other than the conference, the student, anything. Talk about the weather, a football game, vacation, anything else, because you don't want anything recorded that would come back to haunt you. As far as sticking to the agenda is basically the IEP. So you're going to go through it from beginning to end, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But you can add to these, you can take some away, but I would say that you have some sort of list of ground rules that you get consensus on at the beginning of your conference that you can then use to guide and work through the rest of the meeting. Safeguards. Yes, you actually have to talk about them. You have to provide them. And yes, I know you provide them 100 different times, but you have to provide them. You have to, if a parent says, what is it? I don't understand. They have to be fully informed in their native language or their mode of communication, Braille, whatever it is, in order to understand. If they're not fully informed, you can't fully inform somebody if you just hand them a piece of paper. So ask them if they understand their rights, if they have any questions about their rights, offer them their rights. I used to have my little spiel about what this procedural safeguards were about, kind of the sections that there were. And then I would go to the last page where they have the information about where to call if you disagree or who you can contact, so that they know that there are different sections, what to find, and who to contact if they need help when we are done. Because if you just say, here's your parent rights, and that's all you give them, that know that a lawyer, if it goes further, is going to say they were not fully informed. If you need it in another language, you also need to do that. I know on the IEP system, it does give you options of how to get it in different languages. So just make sure you give parents their safeguards. Now, a parent can say, no, thank you. And they can, if they leave it on the table, they leave it on the table. If they refuse to take it, they refuse to take it. But you have to provide it, and you have to have at least attempted to give it to them. Again, if you have parents that have kids that are older that have been, and they've been to a lot of case conferences, they probably have a lot of parent rights. Sometimes they might say to you, hey, is anything changed? If you say no, they may not take it, but you still need to offer it, and you still need to have your little whatever you're going to say about it to ensure that they get them. You have to go through the whole IEP if you're having a case conference. Now, if you're reviewing, yes, you can just review a certain spot, but for the most part, you have to go through the entire process from beginning to end. In the IEP system, if you go through the boxes at the bottom in order, you will do it correctly. You have to go through it from beginning to end. That's the agenda. So when I give the ground rules and I talk about the agenda, I kind of point out that I say we're going to go through the process from beginning to end. And I point out the most important parts that drive the IEP process. So you're going to have present levels, goals, services. You have to do each one of those before the other. Now there's stuff in between, yes, but you can't do goals unless you know what the present levels are, and you can't do services unless you know what the goals are. Now, sometimes this gets hard. This is where I would have some way, a parking lot or something. Or even if you have, say, Post-its, and somebody asks a question about services, a parent asks a question about services, and you're talking about present levels. Write their question down, put it on one side of your computer, and say, we will get to that when we talk, but right now we have to finish talking about present levels. Because if you don't have some way to acknowledge a question from a parent, they are going to keep trying to think about that question, and they're going to miss some of the discussion or they're going to try to be digging in their purse to write it down. They will miss part of the discussion. When I'm facilitating a case conference and I have charts on the wall where I'm writing notes, I will put it in a red marker so that it gives me a visual to make sure the question is answered. When I was doing it myself, you can put the questions on the right side of your computer. When you get to the section it belongs in, you can say, hey, wait, we had a question, answer the question, move it to the other side of the computer so that a parent has a visual so they know their questions have been answered. I do know that if you give parents and the rest of your people at the meeting copies of the draft, the IEP at the bottom doesn't print the same way as you do it across the bottom. I know that. So you have to, if you're on a section, you have to be able to tell the parent what page you're on. So kind of think about that as you go. Now, that said, I would tell the parent, look, but you can blame it on whoever you want. Say it does not print the same way as I have to go through it on the bottom. So I'm going to tell you where we are, but we will go over every single thing in that printed information as we have at the bottom, so that that communication piece, that piece that is transparency, that they will know you're being transparent. As you go through the IEP, don't leave anything out. If you have a first grader, they don't take standardized testing. They don't have transition. Don't just skip over it. Have in your head your little blurb what you're going to say. Say, okay, right now we're on standardized testing, and your student is first grader, so they don't take any standardized testing till third grade. Your student isn't yet 14. When they're 14, we will talk about transition, so that the parent, when they get it and they're looking through it and it says transition, no, if they don't know what that means, or they don't know you've addressed it with them, then they think you're not being transparent. If your student is not an English language learner, say that too. Your student speaks English, so have something to say about every single section, so that a parent, when they get the copy, their hard copy later, and they're looking over it, they know that you have actually talked about every single section. That's really important for the transparency piece, because often parents will say, well, they didn't talk about this. Well, we're so used to doing them, they didn't have to talk about it, but a parent doesn't always know that. So obviously, if you have a third grader that's been in kindergarten, they'll say, okay, yep, I know the transition comes later, but I would still have your little blurb ready. So obviously, some sections you're going to talk a lot about and others not so much. When it comes to present levels, the present levels are your present levels. It's what school sees every day. Parents often, I've heard parents say those present levels are wrong. I don't agree with the present levels. So here's what I would suggest. If a parent says no, ask the parent what they see and put in your notes what the parents see as the present levels. I found, don't change your own, because it's what you see, but it's also what the parent sees, and they're in a different setting and their information might help. Again, if you have a student with autism that doesn't generalize, or any student that doesn't generalize from one setting to the next, if a parent says they always eat with a fork at home and you don't see them ever eating with any utensils at school, that's information that you can use, that the occupational therapist can use, whoever can use that information to say to the student when they're doing instruction, hey, mom says you use the fork all the time. Can you show me how you do it? So acknowledge the parents' present levels, put them in the notes, and explain to them, just like I told you, like, your information is good information. It's not what we see at school, but it's what you see at home. It's information. Put that in. Just like when you ask a parent their concerns, you write their concerns. Regardless of what you think about the concerns, you still have to write them down to acknowledge that the parents have concerns that need to be addressed in some way. Data. You have to have data. You don't want opinions. It helps so much if you have the data and not an emotion. If you have a teacher, gen ed teacher, that says a kid is lazy, the kid doesn't try, the kid is not engaged, okay, that isn't data. That's an opinion. That is not the information that you want. You don't know if the kid is lazy or if there's something else going on. There are so many other things that could be. So you want the information. If a student hasn't turned in any assignments, that's information. If the student has 90% accuracy on tests, that is information that you want to know. If a student was able to walk from class A to class B alone without hitting anyone, 80% of the time, that is data. That helps you make decisions because it's data. It can't be it can be disputed, but that is information that helps you make better decisions. So make sure you have data, not opinions. A delight to have in class doesn't tell you anything. That doesn't help you make a decision about what skills students are missing that prevent them from accessing the curriculum. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you how to move forward. And remember that the data and the present levels are what helps you decide on what goal. The data helps you decide if the student is meeting the goal and needs to have a different goal or increase the goal. You need data. You don't need opinions. So make sure that that's what you have. When you're going to do your progress monitoring, you have to have multiple data points in progress monitoring or you will not get a trend. That's what you need. You need a trend to show whether the student is going up or the student is regressing. At least 4 data points. Like sometimes if you look at your progress monitoring and it's just a straight line, that doesn't tell you anything. And I know it's hard to keep up, and I know you need to come up with a system by which you put data in, but you also can use things you have. You don't have to make up something new. If you give a spelling test every week, use a spelling test if that's what fits. If the end of the chapter quiz helps, use that. But you have to have enough data to show regression or progression. If you determine that, let me just say too, if you have that person that says they're not turning in assignments, then maybe it's executive functioning. Maybe they need help organizing. That could be a goal. Remember, your goals have to be skill-based. Has to be a skill. Turning in homework is not a skill. But organizing the homework in order to turn it in could be a skill. If you determine as you're going through your case conference that you need a reevaluation, or you might not have enough data for a behavior plan, so you want to do a functional behavior assessment. If there's some other evaluation that you need, what do? Well, you can determine that that's what you're going to need and then meet again after you get that information. But in the meantime, you have to go with what you have so that you can have instruction and informate with the information that you have to move forward until such times as you get the new information. So yes, that is also something that you need to consider if you need different, more, or a new evaluation altogether. Okay, again, this sounds pretty simple, but using respectful language, that just seems like a no-brainer. You need to be calm. You need to be respectful. It goes back to your ground rules to come back. Watch your body language. Your body language, like those eye rolls, you got to watch that. Can't crossing your arms, sitting back. Be mindful of how your physical appearance looks when you're at the conferences and when you're frustrated. The acronyms and jargon, like doctors, Teachers have their own, educators have their own language. And we talk about FAPE and LRE and least restrictive environment, right? And the WISC and all sorts of acronyms. Remember that parents don't always know what those are. So try to avoid them, or if you're going to use them, say what they are. This is what parents, that we think this is a free and appropriate education for your student. Don't say this is FAPE. Parents aren't always going to say what. So just be careful about what acronyms you use and make sure that everybody is clear about what they are. If you say, I think they need some services from the SLP, parent might not know who or what that is. So try to be mindful of any educational jargon and acronyms that you use. Think about when you go to the doctor and the doctor starts talking to you about something and your eyes glass over and you say, oh my gosh, could you please speak in, let me know in plain English. So think about that when you are talking about kids. Try to balance. I mean, some kids there are negatives. Some kids just have some negatives, but try to find positives also. Now, don't be all sugary sweet and misleading, but try to have some positive for kids that you have not necessarily great information about. Again, it goes back to my comment about maybe finding that gen ed teacher that the kid does really well with. So if they do great in PE, have the PE teacher come so they can talk about what a great athlete they are, or the art teacher, what a great drawing, and they help other kids, or that they're great at music. So try to find some balance so that a parent doesn't think they're going to come and just hear all bad news. My kid must be terrible. All I get is negative information. So if you have kids with behaviors, try to work on their goals and work on the data as a positive, not they hit 10 people, but they went 3 class periods with no incidents. That's a positive, right? So try to balance those two, because no parent wants to come and just hear bad stuff about their kid all the time. Also, like I would say, even during the week, the month, try to call parents and say positive things or send home positive notes, because we all know that parents stop answering their phones when they see that caller ID that says the school is calling. So try to balance the positive and the negative. Now, like I said before, sometimes the biggest problem is parents will say, that is not what we said. And they will just say nope to the IEP because of words in a goal or accommodations. So, and I have been in case conferences where the parents are saying one thing, the school is saying something, but they are literally saying the same thing, just in different ways. So again, if you can project it, sometimes this takes away that problem. Because again, if you're writing notes, or if you're writing the goal, or if you're writing those accommodations that are not the little checklist, right, but added accommodations, stop and say, okay, this is what I heard. Is this correct? And read it verbatim. Just read it. And that way, if a parent says, no, that's not what I meant, you have a chance to rewrite it the way that they meant it, not necessarily the way you heard and interpreted it. So sometimes, like at the end of each page, sometimes it might be a good idea to read what notes you've written. Say, this is the things that I've written just at the bottom of the page. Don't save them till the end where they all print out, but while it's fresh in everybody's mind before you move on. This just sometimes helps with those parents, especially if you have parents that have had bad feelings or maybe have come not even from your school. Maybe they've moved from somewhere else, or maybe they were moving from elementary to middle school and they've had a bad experience. Then sometimes going a little bit extra can help make that better. So I would just say sometimes, and sometimes you think it's just a simple word, but if it helps a parent understand and be able to move on, that's okay. So again, if you think you're saying the same thing and you've written it, I would just ask for clarification. Again, here's my parking lot. Do it however you like. Figure out a way to do it so that the questions about placement come at the correct time. The questions about goals come at the correct time. About transition, about placement, about the behavior plan. So you know, as you go through the bottom, that you collect them and then be sure you answer them. So whatever kind of system works for you, do it. Some people have it posted on the wall. Some people have it at their table, but just some way so there's a visual so the parent knows that yes, they've answered my question or they're going to answer it later. This, again, it validates that, okay, I have a question that's worth it. They're not just blowing me off. And once you do this system and you do it, parents will be more comfortable and understand that, oh gosh, right, I'm asking a question at the wrong time, but I know that they will get to it. So it establishes that trust that, okay, it's been a year, can't quite remember the process, but this is a question I have. Okay, it goes in another spot. I'm seeing the person write down my question. That's my question. It's going to be answered. So that just establishes the trust and the confidence that, yes, they are heard. So however you figure out how to do that, whatever works best for you. Sometimes, like I told you before, when you have that time to, a parent wants to have a sidebar or you want to have a sidebar, okay, sometimes a break is needed for other reasons. Sometimes people are just getting frustrated. Or sometimes you may have a question. A question may have come up about transportation. Maybe a student's going to get transportation because it's an initial case conference and you don't know when the bus can start. It's okay to say, okay, we're going to take a break and we're going to walk and talk. We're going to just all go our separate ways and be back in 5 minutes, whether that's to the bathroom, whether that's to the telephone to get answers, whether that's just time to take a breather and everybody kind of go to their separate corners. It's okay to do that. Have a time limit, say, okay, back in 5 minutes. Sometimes that's all it takes to get people back to the table and listening. And again, that means that you don't have to have a sidebar. You just need to go and actually get information. So if that's what, if that's what you need to do, then absolutely say, we're going to take a break, 5 minutes, especially for conferences that are long and people have, I mean, you may even want to just set them like, okay, so you've been working for an hour and a half and you've made it through present levels and you've made it through goals. And now you got to talk about services. You might just say, hey, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll get back to it. So you have to kind of read the room on this one and see when you might need to take a break. Now, this, again, you have to read the room. Silence does not mean agreement. If you have everybody participating and all of a sudden mom gets quiet, dad gets quiet, that doesn't mean they're agreeing necessarily. So that's when you have to kind of stop, check, ask if they have a question, ask if, is there something they want to add? Is there something they disagree with? And you might have to ask them specifically, would you like a different accommodation? Is there an accommodation that you think we are missing? Is there another goal that you think we should add? Does your child do something different at home that we can add to present levels? Do you have a different concern? Ask the questions. Don't just assume that everything's great. But you need to learn, well, not learn, you need to do it kind of like as you go along. So it's not threatening, like, please answer me. So again, your tone of voice, how you're proceeding will either help the parent or guardian or whoever it is join the process or retreat more. Check for agreement periodically. Are we all in agreement that this is a good goal? Yes or no? If a student is there, check with the student. Do you understand what this goal is asking you to do? Especially check with students when you're working on those behavior plans. I have watched adults come up with behavior plans and what the kid will work for while the kid's sitting there shaking their head like, no, I won't. So check for agreement, whether, again, that's a nod, a thumbs up, a verbal, and just try to keep everyone involved and everyone present and everyone participating. Just like students that you have that are quiet, that doesn't mean they necessarily get it. Maybe they don't know what question to ask. So it's the same with the adults. Don't assume that silence equals agreement. When you're getting to the end, make sure that you kind of do a quick review, what you've gone over, what is going to happen next, who's going to be responsible. This is a step that people often forget about or don't follow through with, but I have seen great behavior plans, great goals, great everything, and then we leave the room and we're back at some point because the art teacher didn't know that they were supposed to do X, Y, and Z for the behavior plan, or the parent didn't know what their role in the behavior plan was. So be sure that if there are people that need to know, that they get the information, and who's going to be responsible for doing that, whether it's the teacher of record, whether it's the public agency rep, whoever it is needs to be responsible, whether it's the teacher that has to give the IEP at a glance to the teachers that are going to come face to face with this student, or the secretary needs to be told what to do in certain instances, or the cafeteria ladies or maintenance or custodial, whoever it is that needs to know information, so that if a kid takes the time out by walking in the hall, that they know that's okay if they have a yellow pass. If a student isn't going to make eye contact with you when you ask them what they want on their tray, that that's okay, and you don't cause a problem by demanding that a kid make eye contact with you and ask you when you ask them a question. So make sure that everything and that everybody gets the information that they need so that the kid can be a success. Complete the paperwork, signatures if applicable. Signatures aren't always, some places I know want a signature all the time. I always got signatures when I was a administrator, but they aren't required after the initial, and there are certain, or when placements are changed, but if they aren't always needed for a parent, for the IEP to take effect. So parents also need to know that. You need to tell them if you're going to finish up and they're not going to get the copy of it that day, they need to know their signature isn't necessary. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about what to do during? Any questions? Okay. All right, so I'm going to keep going. So now you're at the end. So it's after the meeting. So you got through it all. Yay. And now you are, what do you do next? Okay, watch these timelines. A parent, like sometimes I know we've gone through them, but there are things that you have to tweak or fix or find out or add, whatever it is, in order to finalize your conference. Parents have to receive a copy of it within 10 business days. Business days. That means that if you do a case conference 2 days before Christmas vacation, your Christmas vacation are still business days. If a bank is opened, it's a business day. So your school might not be open, but if the bank is open, you have those 10 days to get it done. So when it says here, the end of the year, when you have a meeting just prior to a holiday or a break, be aware of your timelines because you only have 10 days to get that document to the parent. Okay. And I would explain this to the parent at the end when you're going to send it to them. And again, how do they want it received? Parents, do they want it mailed? Do they want it faxed? Do they want it emailed? Do they want it sent home with her? How do they want to receive the information? Because we all know that a fax or an email is not necessarily secure. So I would ask and make sure you know how the parent wants to receive the information because you only have that 10 days to get it to them. Now, the difference then is on the 11th instructional day, that's when the IEP takes effect. Even if like initially, if that initial case conference, yes, the parent has to sign, but after that, the parent doesn't have to sign it. It's still going to take effect. The parent has to let you know that they disagree. Okay. They have to tell you. So make clear to them that on the 11th instructional day, so that they don't, some parents think that if they don't sign it, it's not going to go into effect. So you need to be sure that parents understand that if it's not the first one, that it is going to go into effect on day 11, even if they have not signed. But with those instructional and business days, again, when you're doing it during like near a vacation or near summer, it can be weird timing. So be sure that you have a calendar where you know which are business days and which are instructional days and when it will take effect. I know it gets hard when you're trying to do it over those different kinds of breaks, summer, Christmas, any kind of holiday. So be sure that you have a calendar yourself and you know exactly what your deadlines are. And then you explain that to the parent too, so that the parent walks away knowing what their timelines are. Huh. So teamwork. That's what, in order for kids to be successful, it's got to be a team effort. And that includes everybody that supports the kid at home and everybody that supports the student at school. So we're all in it together. And we have to try our best to keep everybody involved. And that includes the kid himself. So are there any questions? Any questions from anybody? I know I kind of went through it fast. It's a little harder on Zoom. I wish I could see all of you. But so are our lives at this point. All right, so here are two links. If you could go to the online eval, and there's a little scanner thing, should work, to evaluate what you learned today. And if you want to go for any additional trainings, you can click on the other Scan Me Professional Learning tab that will take you to other trainings. Oh, thanks, Heather. So either one of those. And again, I'll come back to it just as, okay, what Amy's question is, the handout will be available to print. I will, when I send you your certificate, because everybody will get a certificate for participating today, I will also include the PowerPoint so that you will have that. Okay, so I will do that. And again, if you have, let me go here and then I'll go back. This is me. So if you have any questions or anything else that you might, after you think about it or after you look over the PowerPoint and say, I have another question about case conferences, send me an email or call me, and I will be glad to answer any questions that you have as you go through the process to try to help you out. So if you have specific issues or questions, feel free to call me or email me, either way. And here are some other resources that will also be obviously in your PowerPoint for the Resource Center. So you will have all this information. And here are some other of the Indiana, Indiana Resource Network people if you need help or have questions for any of them. So I'm going to go back to this. So if you need to, so for the eval, the eval will be this date and the IEP presentation. So if there's no more questions, I will let you go, and I will be sending, you will get like I said, you will get the PowerPoint as well as a certificate. So I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.